Slavery is bad. Okay, bye. Thanks for watching. Let's get started. God damn it, this should not be so hard. But if you're like me, a proud otaku and a purveyor of the fine art of mangas, you might not be able to help but notice the prevalence of stories where slavery is being justified. If you're a moralist like me, it's hard to not be irked out by that. However, with my recent rereading of Harry Potter and its whole slave elf race thing, it's becoming clear to me that there is a not insignificant portion of the population, regardless of race or nationality, who are not just comfortable with, but actively trying to justify slavery. And they always do so with similar twisted logics. So I want to break those fallacious logic apart in this video. Because for people like that, I don't think it's possible to argue with them on morality, even though you shouldn't own people should be the be all and all of this conversation. They will continue to hide behind these logic gates to justify their actions. So I want to break those twisted logic gates down to make sure these people have absolutely nowhere left to hide. And I shall start with the scenario of slavery as a racial trait. You see this argument in Harry Potter and a lot of other Western fantasy works where the elves or whatever are slaves because it's their racial trait. There are real world equivalents of this where slave owners would argue that other races were born to be slaves because of certain biological characteristics that cannot be changed. The obvious argument against this is slavery is bad. The less obvious argument is that people can change, and they do change. But if those arguments were enough for people like this, Harry Potter would have ended differently. So let's look at the logic of the argument itself. The basis for this argument is a biological one. You were born to be a slave. In the past, slave owners literally argued that black people were born to be slaves. Outside of the moral argument, the biological argument doesn't even square with our knowledge of, life as we know it. There cannot be a natural slave race because life evolves. Slavery is not a survival mechanism like symbiosis or parasitism. It is an action that has to be performed on another species or person. It must be something done to the slaves. For there to be a natural slave race like the elves in Harry Potter, the idea of slavery must exist first. Someone chose the elves to become slaves. You can then maybe breed a species like the elves to become subservient, but that species isn't naturally subservient. It was made that way. It is biologically impossible for slavery to be a natural construct. There must be an outside force. It has to be created. And if you can breed a species into a slave race, you can also technically unbreed them. This is really eugenicsy. I hate this. Slavery is bad. Slave owning, however, is a survival mechanism that can be traced on the evolutionary tree. There are species of ants that owns slaves, and some of them are so dependent on their slaves that they lost their ability to survive without them. Reminds me of a slave owning group that no longer exists, like a confederacy of some sort. But all this means that if you think slavery is right and you believe in eugenics because you're a monster, you are biologically a useless asshole. Slavery as a choice. I'm not black enough to talk about Kanye, but I am nerd enough to talk about mangas. As stated at the beginning of this video, the defense of slavery has seen a recent surge in the medium in recent years. Japanese mangas are known for pushing the boundaries of societal acceptance, but it usually takes the form of independence and anti-stagnation. Popular mangas often hold themes of rebellion and ideas of individual personality and freedom, which is why it's so weird for the defense of slavery becoming so common. It's probably not a coincidence that it coincides with the popular rise of the isekai genre, a genre plagued with wish fulfillment and power fantasy. But I'm not here to do literary analysis for today. That sounded a lot more dramatic in my head. I'm purely looking at the defense of slavery. In a recent chapter of the manga Isekai Walking, the main character, let's call him Sora because that's his name, was stopped from entering a city because the companion he traveled with didn't have the fantasy equivalent of a passport. The author then suddenly introduced the concept of slavery into this fantasy world and said that if he magically marked his companion as a slave, they would be allowed in. Learning about the continued existence of slavery in the world made Sora uncomfortable, and rightfully so. Sora realized he had no choice but to go through with the process in order to proceed. And if that was all there is to it, then there would be no problem. A character has to put up with a culture and system of slavery in order to get to their goals, even though doing so went against their morality. That line of logic makes sense. It's painting the act as a necessary, even temporary evil, just to get from point A to B. It might not be something I would do or want to do, but it made a certain level of moral sense. Until the author took 2 entire pages to explain the positive aspects of slavery. You heard me right. Positives of slavery. So before we tackle slavery as a choice, let's do a lightning round for the following. People in debt could sell themselves to pay off debt. This is called debt slavery or peonage, and the solution for this is an easy one. Instead of enslaving someone to pay off a debt, you can just hire them for lower wages instead of, owning a person. Simple as that. No slavery required. Looking at you, Saudi Arabia. Convicts can avoid the death penalty. For this, you can just don't have death penalties. In this case, the death penalty is taken as an immovable fact of life, that it is as natural to a legal system as water is to earth, when in reality, it is a policy decision that can be unmade or changed to something like life in prison. This argument is just an excuse to use the death penalty as an object of fear to encourage slavery. War refugees can get a new home. I don't know about you, when I'm thinking of war refugees, I don't really think of making them slaves. We can just give refugees homes. No need for slavery. If you really want to get something back, you can just have them do work without owning them as people so that they are free to find jobs when they can pay and rent later without being legally tied to a master, No slavery needed. I don't know why this is an argument, but it is. Slavery is bad. I don't know if I've said that before. Back to slavery as a choice. In the manga, Sora's companion wants to become Sora's slave because she wants to stay together with him. This is also very reminiscent of the elves in Harry Potter who wants to stay slaves because it makes them happy. Setting aside whatever convoluted reasoning the authors made up, the question we should ask, aside from what the fuck, is why does it have to be slave? What I mean by that is this. Sora's companion wants to stay with him. Why does she need the moniker of a slave? Or more importantly, why does that term need to be defended? Why could the author not just have her be a slave with all the negative connotation that comes with it? No defense needed. It's a terrible thing and they have to deal with it. The same can be asked of Rowling's elves. Why choose the term of a slave race instead of just being a servant? Domestic workers are an honored profession, from maids to butlers to housekeepers and more. So why slaves? The authors of these stories took painstaking efforts to jam a brick into the stories to specifically defend the choice of slavery. They could have used any other form of plot contrivance to make the same point or create a barrier that they have to pass, but they chose slavery. Or just avoid the topic altogether, man. You guys are writers, you're in control of the world, you can do anything you want. Harry Potter never freed the slaves from systemic slavery. In Isekai Walking, the topic of slavery disappeared immediately after the chapter about it, never to be mentioned again. If the goal was to create a temporary roadblock, why not have Sora go through an adoption process or not justify the morality or any number of other ways you can tell this fictional story without defending slavery? And the only reason I can think of is that on some levels, these authors must think slavery is good, or at the very least, not that bad a thing to have. Not to be the slave, of course, but to be the owners. And to justify that theory, we just need to look at the genre. Fantasy. They are enacting their power fantasy, a wish to control others. And to do that, they have to weave through this moral song and dance and set up these specific circumstances where slavery could be good. And that's when you realize the fatal flaw in this slavery as a choice argument. For slavery to be argued as a choice, or through any of the other reasons given, these people had to create fictional fantasy situations where there are no other choices. Hello everyone, this is a quick simple video because if all goes to plan, by the time you see this, I will be editing my next long ass documentary. It's quite a big project that I'm working on. It might take a little bit longer than usual for my next video to come out. Thank you to my lovely Patreon. If you want to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/Aiden_Ng where you will get nothing. I don't really have any rewards right now. You get your name on this thing here. Look at the beautiful names. Ooh. I'm not selling this very well. I wonder why I don't have more subscribers. Anyway, that's it for today. Remember, slavery is bad, and I will see you next time. Bye.